If we get to a state where we no longer have privacy, we will no longer have the self-correcting mechanisms in our society that protect our freedom. We will no longer be able to have investigative journalists. We will no longer be able to have opposition parties. We will no longer be able to have a protest movement.
Naomi Brockwell is one of the most well-known educators in the privacy space today. And recently she's begun using that voice to influence legislation here in the US that could be a significant step in regaining our privacy as citizens, by default. Naomi helped draft the proposed Surveillance Accountability Act, which was introduced just a couple weeks ago and would require the US federal government to stop buying data from third-party data brokers and get a warrant in all situations where they want your data. We were fortunate enough to sit down with her and talk about the bill, how it works, and why it matters. But we also got to pick her brain on what the process was like and how you too can get involved. Not just with this bill, but with your own local politicians and activist groups to help influence change in your area. A quick side note, you'll notice there were some technical difficulties with my microphone in this interview. We tried our best to correct it, but it still sounds like I have a pretty intense lisp. Thankfully, it's only on my mic, and I don't do most of the talking, so we do apologize for that, but we hope you'll still learn a lot from our guest. So in the very off chance that anyone in our audience hasn't heard of you, could you give us a brief overview of who you are and what you do?
So my name is Naomi Brockwell. I run the Ludlow Institute. We are a nonprofit that focuses on advancing freedom through technology, and we focus mainly on privacy technology, decentralized technology, anything that can really give people back freedom in this digital realm. So we have a lot of free tutorials out there. We do policy work. We host classes. We interact with people in really high-risk scenarios who, for them, privacy is a matter of life and death, try to help them get protected. And really, we're just focused on this surveillance state that is just exploding right now and helping people who need privacy reclaim that in their lives. We see it as a foundation of a free society. So we are fighting to protect that, because without it, I just don't see how freedom can be preserved.
You had a lot of great quotes about that in your announcement video, which we'll get to in a minute. On that note, you have been campaigning against mass surveillance for a very long time, and this probably seems a little obvious, especially to our audience, but can you give us a brief overview of why you're so passionate about this issue?
As I said, privacy is a foundation of a free society. And I think a lot of people miss that fact. They see it as, what have they got to hide? They're doing nothing wrong. And they forget that it's not about doing nothing wrong. First of all, it's about are you aligned with what the government says is wrong? Throughout history, we just have countless examples of how sometimes the government just chooses really atrocious things that they think are wrong. Sometimes they target whole demographics. Sometimes, there's genocide. Sometimes there's just mass persecution of people. And so this idea that I will always be aligned with government, therefore I need privacy, is crazy and naive when you take a look at history. But on top of that, it's not just about the individual and whether or not they feel they have something to hide. It's whether you want to live in a society where no one has any free space away from the people who have ultimate power in society. That's a dangerous society. You don't want someone who has ultimate power being able to get unfettered access to everything that you're doing. Because in that scenario, you can't form protest movements. You can't be a whistleblower. You can't be an investigative journalist. You can't speak truth to power or hold those in power accountable. It becomes very dangerous to push back once some sort of authoritarian regime, gets a stranglehold on power. And so privacy is really that safeguard that helps people protect their freedoms and preserve all these self-correcting mechanisms that we have in society. So tremendously important, regardless of whether you think you're interesting or have anything to hide, or all of those quips that we hear people self-righteously proclaim as if it's something to be proud of. I feel like they're just kind of admitting I'm not an interesting person and I never plan to be interesting. I will always conform to whatever the mainstream view is and whatever the government tells me is right and wrong, and I will never push back. I don't know if that's something to be proud of.
That's well said. I think I might start using that one when people say I have nothing to hide. That's a good way to put it. So we're here today to focus specifically on the Surveillance Accountability Act, which is a brand new proposed legislation that you were deeply involved in helping craft. So could you give us a brief overview of what the act itself is?
Yeah, the act really doesn't say anything more than the Fourth Amendment says. But unfortunately, the way that the courts have been ruling whether or not we have Fourth Amendment protections in the United States are really outdated and just don't take into account this digital era. So basically, the Fourth Amendment is meant to be one of these safety checks in society that says that Government and the people with ultimate power are not allowed unfettered access to your life because that can be abused. This was created in retaliation. Back when this was written, there was a revolution. You might have heard of it. But essentially, you had England and the King's men just rifling through the homes of anyone who criticized the crown. And this led to tremendous abuse of power and ultimately led to a revolution where the people said no more. They declared independence. But the Fourth Amendment was written against something called a general warrant. This piece of paper that they would write to themselves that says, I give myself permission to go through all your things anytime I want. And again, it was just used to target those who embarrassed the crown, who criticized the crown, who tried to oppose the crown. It was just a mechanism of control. So when the founders set up America, they wrote the Fourth Amendment and said, no, if you want to do a search, you need a warrant. And the warrant needs to be specific. You need to actually state, what you're after, what you're looking for, where you hope to find it. All of these things just help preserve that accountability. And then they said, you have to make your case in front of a judge. You have to convince the judge that this is warranted intrusion in someone's life. They have to agree with you. And only when the judge has signed off are you allowed to intrude on someone's life. This was super important, that separation of powers, two different branches of government agreeing, because ultimately you can't let law enforcement decide the limits of their own power. Like, let's pretend that even in the best case where, they have the best interests at heart and all they want to do is go after the bad guys, even in that scenario, law enforcement has their own agenda. They're focused on catching the criminal, closing the loop, figuring out the case. And so when they look at the pieces of someone's life, it's possible to put together fragments of someone's life to build any narrative that you want. And if their focus is on I gotta prove that, this person did it, all the pieces tend to point in the same direction. And so the founders even saw that was an issue and said, okay, it's fine, but let's have a judge who is this detached, third party come in and do they agree? They're not part of this crime-solving expedition. And so they might have a little bit of a more neutral take. This was repeated in the 40s. The Supreme Court referred to law enforcement as this competitive enterprise of ferreting out crime, because it often is this competitive enterprise. You got people vying for promotions and they want gold stars. And so even in the best case scenario where these people really want to do the right thing, you really need someone detached. And so in the 40s, the Supreme Court referred to them as neutral and detached magistrates. You want that second branch of government holding them accountable. And the warrant requirement creates a paper trail. So that's what we were meant to have, this kind of system of checks and balances where abuse of power would become more difficult and we could make sure that individuals were protected. Fast forward to 2026. The judiciary is nowhere in sight. Law enforcement is buying all of our data. They're searching this at will. They're not getting a warrant for any of it. They're going straight to Google and saying, search this database. And they're not getting warrants for this. They're just handing over blanket subpoenas that don't require any judge to be involved at all. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is an egregious violation of the Fourth Amendment. We're meant to have checks and balances. But what is missing is that the government is basically carving out all these areas and saying, we don't consider this a search. Oh, buying data and creating our own database and doing a search? Oh, that's not a search. That's a query. Oh, searching Google's entire database? Oh, that's not a search. That's also a query. The word search is not special. It means the same thing today that it meant when the Constitution was written, when the Bill of Rights was written. But the Surveillance Accountability Act basically just defines search. It says no more. It closes these loopholes where we've carved out all these areas of unfettered access to our digital lives. And it says a search is a meaningful investigation of someone. And if law enforcement wants to do this, they need a warrant. And on top of that, if they don't get a warrant, individuals can hold them accountable. So it's super simple and really just brings us back to those original checks and balances that we've largely forgotten in the digital age.
There's so much in there, so much good stuff. I want to go off in so many different directions.
If you like interviews like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're just as committed to helping support grassroots activism as Naomi is, and we have an entire section of the website dedicated to helping teach readers how to organize, find out what laws are currently being considered in your area, how to get involved in influencing those laws, and how to avoid burning out as we fight for change together. But creating this content and maintaining it takes a lot of time and effort. So if you're getting value out of resources like our activism section, our interviews like this one, or any of our content, it would mean a lot to us if you could help donate. Privacy Guides is an independent nonprofit, meaning that we're entirely supported by our community. You can make a donation at privacyguides.org/donate using a credit or debit card or cryptocurrency, including but not limited to Monero.
Actually, yeah, touching on that, you mentioned the general warrants, and this is one thing I noted when I watched your announcement video. Like I said, you had so many good quotes, but one of them was you talked about those, and you said that they were used to target dissent. Anyone who criticized the crown could become a target. And I don't know if I really have a question on this one, but I just wanted to highlight that we're seeing that happen again. You know, there's been several articles just in the past few months of like people on Reddit, people on Instagram, like just criticizing the government, not planning any violence as far as we know, and yet DHS is like requesting their data from Meta and Reddit and places like that. So
that's exactly what's happening, and it's only going to get worse. We're headed towards an era of preemptive law enforcement. Now, some people might be like, oh, that's great. You know, we can catch criminals before they do the crime. This will help save people. This will be way better than waiting for bad things to happen and then going after people. But the opportunity for abuse in a system like that is way too much for a free society to put up with, which is exactly why you never want preemptive law enforcement. First of all, you should punish like actual crime, not like thought crimes. And when you get into the realm of thought crimes, suddenly you can go after anyone or make a case about anything. Oh, well, our AI predictive algorithms suggested that this person was thinking about saying something very nasty about this politician. Therefore, they need to be locked up for the rest of their life. So this kind of preemptive law enforcement is kind of, I mean, it's what like dystopian sci-fi thrillers like Minority Report talk about. And we all cite things like Minority Report as being terrifying examples of what we don't want tech to get. Yet that is exactly where we're headed, you know? And so when you lose the ability for accountability, this paper trail, and you have unfettered access to the lives of everyone. It's not just like dissent. It's individuals who are corruptible going after like opposition members. It's people who are trying to shut down protest movements before they begin. It's people who are literally stalking their ex-lovers using this unfettered access and tracking technology to go after people who are close to them. And so it's really scary stuff. You always want to create systems that have these safety rails baked into it, because ultimate power is just too scary, and you can never promise it won't end up in someone bad's hands. So you want to make sure these can't be abused. Now, we have so many systems that are just ripe for abuse right now. We're creating them without any thought for what happens when the ultimate bad person gets control of this. What happens to society? What happens to our potential to have day-to-day freedoms? And we lose all of that. So we really need to get back to a place where we are creating safety mechanisms in this infrastructure. The ultimate safety mechanism was this Fourth Amendment. It is to just stop that access in the first place unless the government has a real good reason. And they have to prove that reason to a judge, and the judge has to agree. You know, it's not a fail-safe. It doesn't mean that that system can't be abused, but it is orders of magnitude better than this dystopia we've got right now, where government is getting every part of your life that has been mapped onto a data point, and they are searching it at will. And that is just like a terrible, terrible scenario for society.
This wasn't one of the questions, but just off topic. Have you heard about Carissa Veliza's new book, Prophecy?
No.
You would love it because it's all about algorithms and predictions. And she's professor of ethics at Oxford.
Added to my list. Absolutely.
So I'm going to go back to the bill real quick. One of the things in the announcement video that you really stressed when you guys were talking about the bill was the private right of action. For those who may not know, what is that and why is it so important that so many people like us always harp on that?
It's because there's so much immunity baked into the roles that people with power are fulfilling that it ends up being this terrible system when no one is held accountable when they abuse that system. So this immunity means that like if people abuse their power, we don't really have recourse. And so we can't push back, you know, they can't be held responsible. There's no disincentive to abusing this system. And so what this bill does is it bakes into it that individuals can sue the government. If someone accesses your information and they needed a warrant to access it and they didn't get a warrant, you can personally sue them. And that kind of accountability is just so important. Like, I mean, if you look at Pfizer, for example, they have some audits. They meant to do like regular accountings of how these systems work. They never do. I think the only insight or peek behind the curtain that we got was very revealing in that we found out that NSA's giant surveillance apparatus that they built that is only meant to be looking outward. It was approved because like Pfizer stands for foreign, right? It was approved as an outward looking mechanism at like foreign nations and foreign nationals and like foreign hostilities. And baked into that was this protection that internally people like local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, they weren't meant to be able to get access to this to internally inspect the population. Because again, it was seen as this like tool that could potentially be abused and be tyrannical. And instead, especially with the Patriot Act, we knocked down all of the walls for data sharing. And so that implicit separation disappeared. And in some of these accountings, we found that FBI has been querying these databases hundreds of thousands of times. I think that the courts found like 7 of them or some ridiculous number were actually legitimate. And so you're in a situation like that where, again, it's egregious abuse of these like surveillance systems. And you would think, okay, so like what happened? Like, did the FBI get in trouble? No, not only were they not reprimanded, they actually took the opportunity to expand the FBI's access to these systems. So there's just no accountability when people are overstepping these safeguards that are meant to be baked into this. And so it's essential. I think that the private right of action is one of the most important parts of this bill, which is why it's called the Surveillance Accountability Act. If you are doing undue surveillance of a population, you need to be held accountable, and the people will not stand for it. We do not want to be monitored like sheep, like people in 1984, and controlled like that. And if you do that, then we can hold you accountable. The government is meant to work for us. We put them in office and we pay for them, and they're meant to do things that society deems, within the scope of the role that we have assigned to them. If they overstep that and start abusing that power, we should be able to hold them accountable. So that's basically what the bill says.
Totally agree. So in 2023, Representative Davidson from Ohio introduced the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act, which seems to me, and I'll admit I didn't read that one, but it seems to me like it has a very similar intention. So how does this differ from that one?
Yeah, there are a lot of actually great bills. Like even with Pfizer, there's an amendment put forward from Wyden's office. Ultimately, no one is using these amendments. We're just reauthorizing, clean or reauthorizing. Like it's insane what's going on right now with those surveillance powers. But a lot of these bills, I think they're way too narrow. I think that even Pfizer, it's like we have this one program and then this one part, Section 702 of this program, and we're fighting over like the boundaries of this program and meanwhile not making any headway whatsoever. And, we're like battling within this like spectrum that's like tiny. I say like, let's shift the Overton window and remind ourselves the egregious data collection that is going on right now through the third party doctrine and this data broker loophole. Let's change the conversation. Let's not be fighting over scraps of Pfizer. Let's actually reestablish the Fourth Amendment in the digital age. No, all of these programs are unconstitutional. If the government wants access to our information, they need a warrant. And I think that a lot of these efforts, I love the direction they're headed in. They don't go nearly far enough. I still think people should support them, obviously. Any ground that we can win in this fight is important. But by narrowly scoping things, I think a lot of politicians think that it's helpful to play it safe. Like, I'll never get something through that is like so large. Let me just fight over these scraps here and see if we can make a little headway. You don't win actually any ground in those fights anyway. So all that does is reaffirm this giant surveillance state that we have, that we can't even make headway on a tiny thing. I say, no, throw out that entire conversation. Let's reframe the debate. And let's say, actually, I want to throw out all of your surveillance without a warrant. Let's get rid of the entire thing. And now you can be sued if you abuse this. Let's reframe it. Because now if we have to narrow the scope to like compromise on this, at at least we're still in the ballpark of civil liberties. At the moment, we're not. All of those have been thrown out the window and all of our freedoms, gone with it. It's ripe for abuse. It's this just awful surveillance apparatus we've integrated into every aspect of our lives. I think we've been asking for way too little, and we need to put our foot down and stop this like creeping baseline of privacy expectations that goes down and down and down every single year. And we just get like, it's normalized like a frog in boiling water, where we're like, just like thankful for any scraps that these politicians throw at us. And I say just no, it's time to actually be okay with our own privacy boundaries as a society and fight for them and stand up for them. Let's actually get together and just, join forces. Let's everyone agree that we want a society that is free, not a society that is controlled. And let's shift the entire conversation.
I love it. You're a very motivational speaker. I'm like getting
I'm
fired
very
up here listening to you. I'm
ranty.
like, yes.
God, you should imagine like the people in my life. I'm sure they're just so exhausted. Like you go out to dinner. "So how was your day, Naomi?" "Well, the surveillance state," like 3 hours later after my TED talk. Yeah, like, "Naomi, please, just we get it. The surveillance state's going to destroy us all." But I feel like we got to keep having this conversation because, again, this Overton window is so often framed by the people who don't understand what's at stake. So it's so important for people like you and me who do understand the battle to just bring people on board, because we have a diminishing window of opportunity. It is shrinking real fast with the advent of AI going through and being able to flag and analyze this information instantaneously. We have lost that kind of ceiling that we previously had, where at least we were limited by the number of people who could sort through this data. That's gone out the window. And so the surveillance state is increasing like exponentially at this stage. I don't think people realize how fast it is expanding and what the world is going to look like in 5 years if we don't change trajectory. So the people like you and me, we see it. That's why we talk about this stuff. That's why we do the work that we do. And we just got to get people on board right now. Otherwise, that window of opportunity will close.
I do want to talk about that, but I had a couple of more quick questions about the act first. The Fourth Amendment is not for sale act. The last activity on it, according to the government website tracker, is like April of 2024. What makes you hopeful that this act will be more successful?
I have no hope that this bill will get more action. We kind of have to kowtow to politicians and beg for our rights and hope they pay attention. Here are the mechanisms by which this potentially can have an impact. I said first mechanism is educational awareness. Most people have never heard of the third-party doctrine. Most people have no idea that as soon as you upload your files somewhere, they're actually fair game and the government doesn't need any warrant to go through them. As soon as you put your prompts into ChatGPT, no warrant requirements. They can give a blanket subpoena to OpenAI and all of your private innermost thoughts and the conversations you had with your AI lawyer and your AI therapist and your AI doctor, suddenly they're fair game. This public awareness, I think, is the biggest campaign. That's why we did such like a media push around this and got so many people talking about it, because again, we need to reframe the conversation. That's the first part. But it's actually not a hopeless cause. So the way that bills kind of get passed is in the House or in the Senate. Basically, a bill will get introduced to the floor. The first step is finding a co-sponsor. So we've got 2 co-sponsors for this bill. We reached out to over 200 officers, and 2 people thought that this issue was important enough that they were like, yeah, we'll get behind this. That being said, a lot of officers, like everyone that we spoke to, was very opposite, like very complimentary about it. They all think this is an issue. Why are they not signing their name to it? Well, there's always political risk signing your name to something. Maybe they feel they have a finite amount of capital, and so they are putting that towards their own bill because everything is this political game. So that's where the public comes in. If we get people calling their representatives and saying, I want you to co-sponsor this bill, it does move the needle. It actually does make a difference, because ultimately, the way that you get bills passed, and it's horrendous, you either need to become like a lobbying firm, in which case it's just, how it works. It's money thrown around, like campaign contributions, all these promises. That's how it works, because a lot of politicians really want to be reelected. But there's a whole other way to encourage this re-election, which is using the power of the people, which is saying, hey, if we get together and actually do an outreach campaign to representatives and we tell them, hey, I'm a single issue voter and privacy is my issue and I want you to support this. what, suddenly they have hundreds of constituents saying that like they're not going to vote for them unless they support these privacy bills. So that kind of activism actually does make a difference. A lot of people, dismiss it. They don't feel important enough. Politicians really care about what you think if there are enough of you to jeopardize their reelection. So I think everyone should be super vocal about this. Now, there are a few other mechanisms that actually make me really hopeful for this, more hopeful than I would for any other bill. So, for example, a bill, first of all, gets these co-sponsors, it gets introduced, then it gets delegated to a committee. This one, I believe, is with Judiciary. It seems like it should be with Judiciary. Thomas Massie is one of the co-sponsors on it. He actually sits on Judiciary. So there could potentially be things that could help encourage people on that committee to work on this. Bills always die in committee. That's like bills get introduced, they go to committee, they die because the speaker, the chair of the committee ultimately gets to control what happens with this. They might just shelve it. They might just say this is not important enough to discuss. That's a problem that the head of the committee gets to have so much power. Now, what Massie has done previously, which is a really rare tool, is you can use something called a discharge petition. A discharge petition is where even if the committee won't look at this, if there is enough support from, say, the House itself, if you can get 218 votes and actually show like, no, we actually want this, you can file a discharge petition and just get it released from committee, take it straight to the floor and get a vote on it. I want to get a vote on this because I want to see who votes yes and who votes no. I would love to see enough people signing a discharge petition, and this can go on after 30 days. If there's like 30 days, this has been stuck in committee, nothing happens with it, that's when you can start to get votes for this discharge petition. You can actually force it to the floor and you can have a vote. There are all of these tools people don't know about that we can be wielding for a lot of this stuff that we care about, but it all requires organizing. It all requires outreach and actually getting together and kind of leading the charge and saying like, no, we want to do this. So that's why I'm hopeful, because we've seen a lot of talk, especially right now with Pfizer 702 and the reauthorization. A lot of people have been publicly voicing their support for privacy and, against surveillance. This is a way to actually hold them to that and say, okay, you care about this issue. Let's force this. Let's get a vote on this. Again, I don't think people quite realize what dire straits we are in when it comes to the surveillance state. And it's this, incestuous relationship of like private companies and governments. Governments are literally just using private companies as contractors who collect all of this stuff. They're paying for it all. So, our taxpayer money is just getting funneled to all these companies, like harvesting our data and then giving it straight back to government. So something needs to be done. And I think that this is a great opportunity for us to just activate and go for it. That's why I'm involved in the policy fight. I'm usually involved in the tech fight. I'm usually like, I don't want to deal with the politicians. I just want to give people privacy tools so they can reclaim it themselves. But right now, especially as they started arresting privacy developers, I don't think we can afford to stay out of this fight. And so that's why I'm telling people like, mobilize with us. Let's just get this done.
That leads into the next thing I wanted to focus on. So I think our audience is starting to become more aware of that. Like you said, like I think a lot of people, and I still see this attitude sometimes of, people are just like, oh, I use whatever tool, whatever service, so this doesn't affect me. But now we're starting to see things like identity verification baked into the operating system, and Android is thinking about locking down third-party installs. And so I think people are kind of starting to realize like, this is a bigger thing. I think our viewers are starting to become more interested in getting involved. So in that spirit, my first question was, can you give us a brief overview of how this bill came to be? Like, did you come up with it, or did somebody else was already working on it and you joined in?
So it was conceived of by me and my institute, Ludlow Institute. We have been watching this space and analyzing policy around this for years at this stage. And as I said, a lot of the stuff out there wasn't going far enough. And so we took it to Congressman Massie and this initial draft, and then we worked with him for over a year on getting the language right, making sure that it includes things like biometric surveillance, flock cameras, all of these things that affect us in the public space. This isn't just about like individual computers. Like I can use my Linux machine and now I'm saved. It's like, okay, are you never going outside and getting on someone's Ring camera ever again? Are you, never traveling in a car with a tire pressure, monitoring system pinging out countless trackers? Or it's just gone so far that people actually can't opt out. Even if they wanted to, they can't participate in modern life if they want to with some semblance of autonomy and privacy in the current situation. So we made sure that we included all of that stuff. These involve searches. If the government wants to do a search using the database of something like Flock, they need a warrant. They can't just have unfettered access to everyone's daily movements that they can search at will. And so we worked a lot of that language in. Master's office was really great with all of this. He has been a long time proponent of privacy and fought against a lot of these encroaching, surveillance issues. We've reached out to other offices too. Like Wyden has also been such a bulwark of privacy rights, and his team's working on their own privacy things right now. But we're hopeful that people like that can all join forces on this bill. And so we're still like chatting with all of these officers to refine this, to make all of this as strong as possible. Yeah, ultimately with this current bill, we worked with him on over a year. We managed to find another co-sponsor, which is fantastic. And I'm just so grateful, not just to Bobert who signed on, but to all the officers that we reached out to who were positive about this. I have a really good feeling that we're going to make some headway with some of them in the near future now that Pfizer is kind of screwed us all. Like we need plan B at this stage. So full steam ahead.
Yeah, I definitely hope we get more on board just because it's such a bipartisan issue. I was actually, on that note, I was a little surprised to only see 2 Republicans on the bill, just because I was like, what do you mean? Like, this is such a bipartisan thing. Like, people on both sides say this stuff.
It's so interesting because politicians can be so dividing and like partisan and all that. Now is not the time to be thinking about that. It's like focus on privacy, right? We have people across the aisle who care about this. Let's find where we agree and come up with a thing that protects us right now. We're not going to win. Like, we're absolutely not going to win if only one side of the aisle is doing this. We've seen like huge support on the Democrat side for privacy right now because of the Pfizer 702. Trump wanted to introduce a reauth, but yet it was 2 Republicans who signed on, and they were very much in the minority. They're people who have been fighting Trump a lot recently. And I think that's why they were brave enough to come on and support this bill. But now is the perfect opportunity to get people across the aisle on this. Like, we've already got Republican support. So if you're in a place that has, Democrat representatives, please reach out to them. We have talked with a lot of these officers. They know what we're doing, but you need to show them that you support this sort of a policy, because I think that a lot of people, they don't feel the need to sign on to things unless, re-election is jeopardized, or, they want to know what their constituents support. And it's just so important that you voice that opinion. And I will just mention, like, with the bill, when we were talking about the provisions for like making sure that like the biometric and the Flock and all of that stuff is covered, we also kept in provisions to make sure that law enforcement could do their job, right? We want to be able to catch bad people. That's super important. And so we make sure that that is not jeopardized at all. If the government is actually doing a legitimate search, they can get a warrant and get whatever information a judge approves of. And I just think that's the ultimate safeguard that we've had for hundreds of years at this stage. It makes sure that law enforcement can do their job. It just also protects societal freedoms at the same time.
No, I agree. I've been saying that for years. It's like, we have a system in place for a reason. If they get a warrant, then you comply with the warrant, but they need to go get the warrant. They haven't been doing that. On the topic of getting involved in the bill, for anyone who might be thinking like they want to get involved in the same way, like, what was the overall process like? What were some pitfalls that you kind of wish you had known and wouldn't repeat next time? Or on the other hand, you keep saying like, we have so many things at our disposal that we can use to try to make bills successfully pass. So like, what are some of those things that you're like, man, I wish I'd have known that. That would have saved so much time.
I just wish that more people had been fighting by our side. There are a lot of really great privacy institutes out there. And what I'm noticing is kind of a fragmentation in focus. They've all got their pet issues, and ultimately their bandwidth is really stretched. I think these organizations need more support. I think that if they had more bandwidth at their disposal, they could allocate more time to things like, our initiative. And so I would love to advocate for them and just say, like, if you have a great institution that does great work in this space, please support them. They're doing amazing work behind the scenes. One of the things that I wish I had known early, like, I kind of presumed that a lot of these organizations would jump on board and, we'd all fight this together. I hadn't actually realized just how understaffed so many of these places are, and like how they're punching above their weight as well. What they're able to achieve with like a lack of resources is incredible. But I do think that people who care about these issues, we need to see the initiatives that are going on and participate. Like, it may not be with funding. Maybe you're not in a position to like fund. Maybe you are in a position to volunteer. Maybe you are in a position to help spread the word. So whenever you see a good cause, don't be afraid to get involved in the fight. A lot of people don't think it's their fight, but it's all of our fights right now. So please, in whatever way you can, whatever your skill set's best suited for, find a way to participate with a lot of these organizations, because I think they really need us right now. They really need their support. The whole process, it's really difficult to get in touch with officers. As I said, we've been working on this for over a year. Even just getting a meeting on a phone call is really, really tough. You kind of need to pay a lobbyist in Washington who already has these connections. We're not paying any lobbyists right now. We're just, doing very limited outreach that we have the capacity for. Most of our overwhelming amount of our time is spent on educational resources. We're just building tutorials. Our main product is our video tutorials and our articles and our workshops and things. So we're allocating whatever we can to this fight. But I would love to, find some organization that specializes in this stuff and help them just run with it. Like, you go, right? Let's move this forward. We can take care of the press side. You guys do that. It's a tough process. It's why I've always really focused on tech and education in the past. But as I said, the time has come where I think we all need to enter every fight. We need to be on the front lines of all of these battles, because it's moving real fast, and we're losing a lot of ground.
I just want to add a personal note on what you were saying about getting involved with other advocacy organizations is to any viewers out there, don't shy away from doing the non-glamorous work. Because I know in my time in privacy, like I used to co-host a podcast with Henry from Techlore, and we had several people reach out over the years that were like, hey, I don't have any money, but like, I want to volunteer, I want to get involved. And the biggest thing we needed help with was show notes and keeping them organized, because Henry was busy and I worked a full-time job. And I'd always say that, I'm like, we could really use help with show notes, and never got a response back after that. And I think people were hoping for something a little bit more glamorous. Unfortunately, it's the really like non-sexy work that really is what people usually, in my experience, what a lot of organizations usually need help with, and also usually does a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, be part of something that's bigger than yourself. Like, I'm sure all of us could be doing other things and probably be earning a lot more money. But like, instead, we see this impending doom and we're like, okay, all right, who else is stepping up? No one? I guess it's me. I guess I'm stepping up. We get the same thing. We get a lot of applications for like technical researchers, because that's a position that we're constantly hiring for. We need more people on staff for that. But as a prerequisite for anyone that we work with, we need to have worked with them on like a smaller research project. They need to apply to our grants program first and make it through that, so that they actually prove themselves in the research. You actually have to do the work and, go through one of these projects successfully. We don't have anyone following up after that. We get the initial CV, but no one actually wants to do the research work that will be needed if they ultimately get hired. So yeah, I would say that if you care about this, keep going with these organizations that you reach out to, and they give you something to do. There's this saying, and it's what we're doing is kind of the inverse. But when they say like, okay, when a rocket ship is taking off and someone offers you a seat, like, you don't ask which seat. Like, you're getting on a rocket ship. You're all like getting lift off. The same thing is like in this sinking boat, right? Like, we're all kind of like drowning right now. I wouldn't be quibbling about the seat. I would like pick up a bucket and start getting the water out of the boat, because otherwise we're all going to drown there. And we need more people, honestly. Every organization in this space needs more support, more awareness, more funding, more volunteers, more passionate people. I'm grateful, so our community, NBTV, has like a members group. So like supporters get access to this private chat. And I love those guys. They're really agentic. They have so much agency. There are people who are hearing suggestions from other people in the group and then making their own blogs and their own summaries of these things. They're compiling notes. They're constantly scouring the web for like new legislation people should be aware of and alerting the group and saying, hey guys, everyone's radar on this. Here's how you can help. Like that, everyone is just so engaged. And I wish that for the entire world. Like I want an entire globe of people who are so engaged and we're all, pulling on this together.
Yeah, I think some of those people used to be in the surveillance report chat as well, because they would mention being in your chat too. And yeah, they were really cool.
Yeah, there's some awesome people out there. I'm grateful to everyone who cares about this. And every show that covers this, like honestly, we can't cover all the ground ourselves, every individual, outfit. So it's so great to just see everyone covering all kinds of different stuff in this landscape. I love that. It's almost like a collaboration, but like a decentralized one, because we're not really like coordinating with this, but yet we're all just covering such ground. I love how many channels there are covering this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I feel that way about the privacy news. I tell people all the time they should be getting their news from multiple sources, because there's all kinds of times that like Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons does news. Henry is still doing surveillance report without
information.
Me. It's really common for him to cover a story, and I'm like, man, I didn't hear about that at all. That's crazy. And it's good to have so many people in the space. You mentioned flock a few times, and this is kind of a really specific question, but flock cameras are really, yes, exactly. They're very, thankfully everyone agrees on that, but they're a very visible example of things. Like they even came up in the announcement video, but what are some other dangers that you think people may not be paying attention to, or maybe haven't heard of yet, that you think people should be aware of, at least have on their radar?
Everything. Gosh, now that we have ID baked into operating systems, this is the end of the free internet. Like, I don't think that people quite realize. Here's the thing. When I started my privacy journey, I was just like every other noob out there, I was not working on this stuff. I was kind of abstractly aware that, surveillance, freedom, blah, blah, blah. But like personally, before I'd actually started my work in this space, like years and years and years and years ago, I was just like everyone else. And almost part of it, like I read Snowden's book was one of these catalysts. Like my channel pivoted pretty hard around that time from being decentralized tech, which I saw as the ultimate tool for freedom. And then I realized it doesn't matter if you have a decentralized protocol. If a government doesn't want you to use it, they'll ban it and then they'll just target you. If you don't know how to use the internet privately, you'll lose access to every decentralized tool that we've built. And I kind of had this shifting moment of like, oh shit, do I know how to use the internet privately? If I needed to, would I be able to? And then I read Snowden's book not too long after, and I was like, what are all these programs like Tempest, Tempura, Turmoil, Turbine, like all these top secret programs I'd never heard of, yet they're literally like being built by Google. They're like a search engine for your IP address and your email and your date of birth and your social security number. And you literally have unfettered access to these tools. The law enforcement can just like search up anything and it brings up every aspect of your digital life. And I'm just like, this is wild. Why is no one talking about this stuff? This is crazy. That's when I was just like, okay, if I need to use the internet privately, like let's say that I wanted to do stuff, maybe I'll spend an afternoon and figure out how to do it. And then, 700 videos later, here we are. Like I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. So you learn one tiny little piece of the privacy landscape at a time. You implement it. And I'm at the stage now where I think most people think the day they need privacy, they'll just be able to get it. And they don't understand that no, privacy won't exist then. We would have, ID verification embedded in our operating systems. We will have ID checkpoints at every point on the searchable web. We will have like some sort of like GPS like tracker, like to follow everything that we're doing. We are so surveilled right now, and we're getting to this tipping point where we will not be able to reclaim freedom. So it's not a matter of like, oh, we'll just build the freedom tools when we need them. Oh, we'll just build the privacy tools when we need it. No, we need them now. And the privacy developers are being thrown in jail. There are countless examples over the past few years of privacy developers literally being thrown in jail for building privacy tools because we've bought the narrative that privacy is just for criminals. Therefore, someone building this tool for criminals must be a bad person. They're basically eliminating the ability of us to have privacy in the future. And we will not be able to build these tools ourselves because all of the AI models are going to have some sort of like mechanism baked into it that is going to immediately flag law enforcement if you want to build a decentralized tool. Like, where is your government verification? Comrade, show us your papers. People don't realize that privacy is already hard if they wanted to actually pursue it today. And tomorrow it's going to be impossible. We're not going to have the option. Like, your children will not have the option of privacy if we continue down this path. We have like your hardware issues, right? You have backdoors like embedded in every Intel chip with these remote management engines. Where is the open source hardware? Where are the people who have the open source schematics so we can verify what chips are actually in our computers? Like, it doesn't exist because there's no demand for it, because we all think, oh, well, if we need it, we'll get it one day. Right. But what lab is going to manufacture it? We've again, this frog in boiling water where there's such a stranglehold on all of these centralized choke points that we're getting to a point where we're actually not going to be able to have the freedom in this technology to do what we want with it. And we need to correct course. Like, we used to think that 3D printers were this ultimate tool for freedom because it's like, yeah, I could just manufacture in my backyard. It'll be great. And then was it Oregon or Washington State suddenly says, oh, now we're going to bake in controls for your 3D printer. They can't do certain things. We're going to verify that you're only using it for government approved purposes. So yeah, all of this freedom tooling, it loses all of its edge if we allow all of these ID verifications to be baked into it. And that's the direction that we're just galloping towards right now. I can't even remember what the question was. All I know is I'm really angry and scared about this situation, and we need a correct course.
No, I think that was still a good answer. Actually, on that note, I'm kind of coming to the end of the question. So a bit of an open floor question. Is there anything that we haven't already covered that you would like to talk about, or anything you want to say?
Gosh, just reiterate the point before. We all need to activate. We all need to play our role. I would say that one really undervalued area of personal activism is voting with your choices. A lot of people think that their choices are just a reflection of their current threat model, and they're actually not. They are meaningfully contributing to the entire marketplace of privacy tooling. And what I mean by that is a lot of people will say like, okay, well, why do I need to use Proton or Tutor? I have nothing to hide. My emails aren't that interesting. I'll keep using Gmail. That active choice is fueling the type of company that is harvesting your data and giving it directly to the government. And whenever you choose them, you are actively not choosing the companies that need your support, that need your contribution to keep them sustainable. So every choice you make, simply because you're thinking about whether or not you have something to hide, you are either helping the people who want to write a better future, or you are helping their competitors and you're pricing them out of the market. So just understand that it's not just about your threat model. It's about what kind of a world do I want to create, and how do I do that with my choices? And am I supporting the future I want to see, or am I supporting the future that I pretend to be against, that, I think is bad? So think about individual choices, I think, is a much more powerful way to frame it. A lot of people think that they don't have any power in this, that it's just this overwhelming situation, they can't fight back. You can fight back in every single choice that you make. And if people were actually value aligned in their choices, we wouldn't see all these companies harvesting our data. They wouldn't exist. But unfortunately, a lot of people make choices that are not value aligned. There are probably a lot of reasons for that. But I do think that the time has come to really stand by your values and actually start fighting for them and reflecting them in your actions.
Totally agree. Last question, where can people follow you, your work, and more about this bill as it moves through Congress?
Yeah, this bill, if you go to surveillanceiaccountability.com, we have a page there. It says support, and it gives you a link to how to find your representative. If you click on that link, you can find exactly who your rep is. We have a script there. If you just want to copy and paste and send them an email, you can absolutely do that. We need co-sponsors for this bill. We need people to reach out to their representative and say that they support privacy. And whether it's this bill or some other privacy bill, you need to be telling your representative that this is an issue that you care about. We really need to mobilize people. Politicians are really not listening right now. The fact that privacy is an overwhelmingly bipartisan issue, and Pew polling suggests that like 80% of people care about this, and yet Politicians overwhelmingly just reauthorized FISA, which destroys privacy. They're constantly just ignoring all of the privacy bills that come across their desks. So their actions are not reflecting the public sentiment. And there's a disconnect between these two things. We need people to reach out to their representative and voice their opinion. That is the biggest way that you can contribute right now. So surveillanceiccountability.com. You can find more about Ludlow Institute, the organization that I run, at ludlowinstitute.org. And we have, 700 free tutorials, videos, articles. We host classes around the globe. We do all kinds of things, so you can check out that. The Surveillance Accountability website is our most immediate thing that we're focused on right now.
Thank you again to Naomi for taking time to talk to us about her new bill. As you saw, she's a very charismatic speaker. Her passion and enthusiasm for privacy is contagious, and I honestly felt very inspired while listening. If you felt the same way, we'd love it if you shared this video around, and if you enjoyed this interview, you may also enjoy our interview with Carissa Vailes about the dangers of predictive algorithms, how they invade your privacy, and how governments and data brokers both disguise them as helpful tools to hide their true intentions.